Hello. Hello, how are we doing? 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 How are we all doing? Let's. Yes, yes. Hope we're doing good. Hope we're doing good today. Whoa, we got echo going on. Hold on. There we go. Okay. I think that was more for me than for you, but regardless, we definitely had some echo going on. How is everyone? I hope everyone is doing wonderfully this fine Sunday. Today, finally, at long last, the promised chapter 2 of The Hobbit. So I apologize for the delay in getting us here, but there we go. When it is what it is. Now we can go ahead and read chapter 2 of The Hobbit. Let's go and we're here. Hello, there we are. How's everyone going this Sunday? Yes. So, I went and splurged, by which I mean I bought an ebook of The Hobbit. Not a thing I really wanted to do. I already have probably 2 or 3 copies of it in actual text, physical copies, but it was the only way that I could find a legitimate copy of The Hobbit without being awful. So hopefully we will not run into the same sorts of problems we ran into last time. Yeah. So have you all got a cup of tea or coffee, some sort of hot beverage that may get you into the mood on this rainy, well, over here rainy Sunday afternoon? All right. So, the Hobbit has just gotten past all the dwarves coming, ruining his house overnight, and then in the morning, they are going to be on their way. Chapter 2. Roast mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved, after all, to think that they had all gone on without him, and without bothering to wake him up. But was never a thank you, he thought. And yet, in a way, he could not help but feeling just a trifle disappointed. Feeling surprised him. Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins, he said to himself, thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age. So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By that time, the sun was shining and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," he said, "what are you going to come whenever?" Let's try that one again. "My dear fellow," said he, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you a message because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all fluster. "Great elephant," said Gandalf. "You are not at all yourself this morning. Have you never dusted the mantelpiece?" "What's that got to do with it? I've had enough to do with washing up for 14. "If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, on his own notepaper. This is what it read. Thorn and Company to Burglar Bilbo, greetings. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms, cash upon delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of the total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives if occasion arises, and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make the prerequisite preparations, and shall wait your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting you will be punctual. We have the honor to remain yours deeply, Thorin and Co. That leaves you just 10 minutes. You'll have to run, said Gandalf. But, said Bilbo. No time for it, said the wizard. But, said Bilbo again, no time for that either. Off you go. To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money or anything that he usually took when he went out. Leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing the keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him, down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater just on the stroke of 11. And he found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. Bravo, said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then all the others came round the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggages and packages and parcels and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. Up you go, up you two, get up. Up you two get, and off we go, said Thorin. I'm awfully sorry, said Bilbo, but I have come without my hat, and I've left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't got any money. I didn't get your note until after 10:45, to be precise. Don't be precise, said Dwalin, and don't worry, you'll have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to Journey's End. As for a hat, I have a spare hood and cloak in my luggage. And that was how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May on laden ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What would his father, Bungo, have thought of him? I daren't think. His only comfort was that he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding for very long when up came Gandalf on a very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco, so after that the party went along very merrily, and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except of course when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but he began to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first they had passed through the Hobbit lands, a wide, respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were the dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly had been as good as May could be, can be even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands, they had been obliged to camp where they could, but at least it had been dry. I think it will soon be June, grumbled Bilbo as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time. It was pouring with rain, and had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes. His cloak was full of water. The pony was tired and stumbled on the stones. The others were too grumpy to talk. And I'm sure the rain has gotten into the dry clothes and into the food beds, thought Bilbo. Bother burglaring and everything to do with it. Wish I was at home in my nice hole by the fire with the kettle just beginning to sing. It was not the last time he wished that. Still, the dwarves jogged on, never turning around or taking any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the gray clouds, the sun might have gone down, for it began to get dark, and as they went down into a deep valley with a river at the bottom, wind got up, and the willows along the banks bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with rains, came rushing down the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they crossed over. The wind broke up the gray clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. And then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper, and where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on? Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far, he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in on the adventure, or merely keeping them company for a while. He'd eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he simply was not there. Just when a wizard would have been the most useful too, groaned Dori and Nori, who shared the hobbit's view on regular meals, and plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees, and although it was drier under them, the wind shook the rain off the leaves, and the drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have gotten the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere out of anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night, not even Oin and Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got to the river before they could catch him and before they could get him out again. Philly and Killy were nearly drowned, and all the baggage that he had carried was washed away off of him. Of course, it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper and less for breakfast. There they all sat, glum and wet, muttering, while Oin and Gloin went on trying to light the fire and quarreling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures were not all pony rides and May sunshine, when Balin, who was always the lookout man, said, "There's a light over there." There was a hill some ways off with trees on it, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of the trees, they could see now a light shining, a reddish, comfortable-looking light, as might be a fire or torches twinkling. When they had looked into it for a while, they fell to arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said they could go and see, and anything was better than little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes all night. Others said these parts are none too well known and are too near the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for the worse. The roads are unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king around here, and the less inquisitive you are as you go along, the less trouble you're likely to find. Some said, "After all, there are 14 of us." Others said, "Where's Gandalf got to?" This remark was repeated by everybody. Then the rain began to pour down worse than ever, and Oin and Gloin began to fight. That settled it. "After all, we've got a burglar with us," they said. And so they made off, leading their ponies with all due and proper caution in the direction of the light. They came up to the hill, and soon they were up in the wood. Up they went, but there was no proper path to be seen, such as might lead to a house or a farm. And do what they could, they made a great deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of grumbling and dratting as they went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly, the red light shone out very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. "Now it's the burglar's turn," they said, meaning Bilbo. "You must go on and find out all about that light and what it is for, and if all is perfectly safe and canny," said Thorin to the hobbit. "Now scuttle off and come back quick if all's well. If not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl, and we'll do what we can." Off Bilbo had to go before he could explain that he could not hoot even once like any kind of owl, any more than fly like a bat. But at any rate, the hobbits can move quietly through the woods, absolutely quietly. They take pride in it, and Bilbo had sniffed more than once what he called all this dwarvish racket as they went along, although I don't suppose you or I would have noticed anything at all on a windy night, not if the whole cavalcade had passed 2 feet off. As for Bilbo, walking primly towards the red light. I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So naturally, he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anyone. And this is what he saw. Three very large persons sitting around a very large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton on long spits of wood and licking gravy off their fingers. There was a fine, toothsome smell. Also, there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs, but they were trolls, obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that from the great heavy faces of them and their size and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing room fashion at all. Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls. Never a blinking bit of man flesh we had long enough, said the second. What the hell Willem was a thinking bringing us here to these parts beats me. And all the drink running short, what's more, he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull of his jug. William choked. Out of your mouth, he said, as soon as he could. I can't expect folk to stop here for forever just to be ate by you and Bert. You had a village and a half between you since we come down from the mountains. How much more do you want? And time been up our way when you're to have said, thank you, Bill, for such a nice bit of fat valley mutton like what this is. Took a big bite off a sheep's leg that was roasting and wiped his lips on his sleeve. Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, even those that only have one head each. After hearing all this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there were three fair-sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, quite likely to try a roasted dwarf or even pony for a change, or else he should have done a bit of good quick burglaring. A really first-class and legendary burglar would have at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It is nearly always worthwhile if you can manage it. Pinched the very mutton off the spits, purloined the beer, and walked off without them noticing him. Others, more practical but with less professional pride, would have stuck a dagger into each of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had read a good many things and he had never seen or done. He was quite much alarmed as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorn and Company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows of the various burglarious proceedings he had heard of. Picking the troll's pockets seemed to be the least difficult, so at last he crept behind a tree to just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up his courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a person in as big a bag as Bilbo, he thought, warming to his new work as he lifted it out carefully. This is a beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this one was no exception. Here, who are you? It squeaked as it left his pocket, and William turned around at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind a tree. Blimey, Bert, look what I've copped, said William. What is it? Said the others, coming up. Let me find out. What are you? Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit, said poor Bilbo, shaking all over and wondering how to make owl sounds before they throttled him. A hobbit, said the trolls, said they, a bit startled. Trolls are slow on the uptake and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. What's a burrow hobbit got to do with my pocket, anyway? Can you cook 'em? Said Tom. You can try, said Bert, picking up a skewer. It won't make more than a mouthful, said William, who had already had a fine supper. Not when he's skin and boned. Perhaps they're more like him around, and we ought to make a pie, said Bert. Here, you, are there any more of your sort of sneaking in these here woods? You nasty little rabbit, he said, looking at the hobbit's fur feet, and he picked him up by the toes and shook him. Yes, lots, said Bilbo before he remembered not to give his friends away. No, none at all. Not one, he said immediately after. What do you mean, said Bert, holding him right way up by the hair this time. "What I say," said Bilbo, gasping. "And please don't cook me, kind sirs. I am a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, a perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if only you won't have me for supper." "Poor little Blighter," said William. He had already had as much supper as he could hold, also had lots of beer. "Poor little Blighter, let him go." "Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all," said Bert. "I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes to his fire till he talks." "I won't have it," said William. "I cut him anyway." "You fat fool, William," said Bert, "as I've said afore this evening. And you're a lout, and I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins," said Bert, who put his fist in William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him onto the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs and calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and applicable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms and rolling in nearly into the fire and kicking and thumping while Tom whacked at them with a branch to bring them to their senses, and that only, of course, made them madder than ever. This would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squished in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round, so there he lay for a while, panting just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight came Balin. The dwarves had heard the noises from a distance, and after waiting some time for Bilbo to come back or hoot like an owl, they started off one by one, creeping towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves uncooked, and Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately and said, "A sack, Tom, quick!" they said, before Balin, who was wondering where in all this commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening. A sack was over his head, and he was down. "There's more of them yet to come, or I'm mighty mistook." "Oh, it's none at all, is it?" said he. "No burr hobbits, but plenty of these here dwarves. That's the shape of it." "I reckon you're right," said Bert, "and we'd best get out of the light." I'm very inconsistent in my accents, but that's okay. And so they did. With sacks in their hands that they used to carry off mutton and other plunder, they waited in the shadows, and as each dwarf came up and looked at the fire and the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton, in surprise, pop went a smelly sack over their head, and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin, and Philly and Killy together, Dory, Nori, Ori, all in a heap, Oin and Gloin and Befor and Bombor and Bofor and Bombor piled uncomfortably near the fire. "I'll teach 'em," said Tom, for Befor and Bombor had given a lot of trouble and fought like mad, as dwarves will do when cornered. Thorin came last, and he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out of the sacks to tell him that things were not at all well. He stood aside in the shadows some way off and said, "What's all this trouble? Who's been knocking my people about?" "It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind a tree. They had forgotten about him. "They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," said he. "Oh, are they?" said Thorin. And he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught a big branch all on fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught a hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning off like a top into the bushes when Tom kicked the sparks up into Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that, and lost one of the front ones. That made him howl, I can tell you. But just at that moment, William came up from behind and popped the sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes, and so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were in now, all neatly tied up in sacks with 3 angry trolls, 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo up in a bush, with his clothes and his skin torn, not daring to move for fear they should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back. But no one saw him. The trolls had just decided to roast the dwarfs now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea. And after a lot of argument, they had agreed to it. No use roasting him now. It'd take all night, said a voice. Bert thought it was William's. Don't start the argument all over again, Bill, said he, or it will take all night. Who's arguing, said William, who thought it was Bert who had spoken. You are, said Bert. You're a liar, said William, and so the argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a great black pot, and they took out their knives. No use boiling them, we ain't got no water. That's a long way to the well and all, said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. Shut up, said they, or we'll never have done. And you can fetch the water yourself if you say any more. Shut up yourself, said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. Who's arguing but you? I'd like to know. You're a booby, said William. Booby yourself, said Tom. And so the argument began all over again and went on hotter than ever until at last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one, squish them, and boil them next time. Who shall we sit on first? Said the voice. Better sit on the last fellow, said Bert, whose eye had taken damage by Thorn. He thought Tom was talking. Don't talk to yourself, said Tom. You won't sit on the last one. Sit on him. Which one is he? The one with the yellow stockings, said Bert. Nonsense, it's the one with the grey stockings, said a voice like William's. I made sure it was yellow, said Bert. Yellow it was, said William. What did you say grey for, said Bert. I never did. Tom said it. I never did, said Tom. It was you. 2-1, so shut your mouth, said Bert. Who are you talking to, said William. Now stop it, said Tom and Bert together. The night's getting on, and dawn's coming early. Let's get on with this. Dawn take you all and be stoned to you, said a voice that sounded like William's, but it wasn't. For just at that moment, the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to stone as he stooped, and Bert and Tom were struck like rocks as they looked at him. And there they stand to this day, all alone unless the birds perch on them. For trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountain they are made of and never move again. This is what happened to Bert, Tom, and William. Excellent, said Gandalf as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo to climb down from the thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls bickering and quarreling until the light came up and made an end of them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were very nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had heard Bilbo's account of what happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. Really time to go practicing pinching and pickpocketing, said Bombor, when what we wanted was fire and food. And that is just what you wouldn't have gotten of those fellows without a struggle in any case, said Gandalf. Anyhow, you're wasting time now. Don't you realize that trolls must have a cave or a hole somewhere for them to hide from the sun? We must look for it. They searched about and soon found marks of the trolls' stony boots going away through the bushes. They followed the track up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came to the big door of stone leading into a cave. But they could not open it, not though they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. Would this be any good? Said Bilbo when they were getting tired and angry. They found it on the ground where the trolls had their fight. He held out a largish key, although no doubt William had thought it very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket very luckily before he was turned to stone. Why on earth didn't you mention it before? They cried. And Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole, and the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air, but there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on the shelves and on the ground, among an untidy litter of plunder of all sorts, from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the walls, too small for trolls. I'm afraid they belonged to victims, and among them were several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Two caught their eyes particularly because of their beautiful scabbards and jeweled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have been only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it made a good short sword for a hobbit. These look like good blades, said the wizard, half drawing them and looking curiously. They were not made by any troll, nor by any smith among men in these parts and days, but when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them. Let's get out of this horrible smell, said Philly. So they carried out the pots of coins and such food as was untouched and looked fit to eat, also one barrel of ale, which was still full. By that time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn up their noses at what they had gotten from the troll's larder. Their own provisions were very scanty. Now they had bread and cheese and plenty of ale, and bacon and toast in the embers of the fire. After that they slept, for their night had been disturbed, and they did nothing more till the afternoon. Then they brought up their ponies, and carried away the pots of gold, and buried them very secretively, not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them, just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted once more and jogged along on the path towards the east. Where did you go, if I may ask, said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along. To look ahead, said he. What brought you back in the nick of time? Looking behind, said he. Exactly, said Thorin, but could you be more plain? I went to spy our road, and it has soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell. Where's that? Asked Bilbo. Don't interrupt, said Gandalf. You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrond's people. They were hurrying for fear of the trolls. It was they who told me that 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from the road. They had frightened everyone away from the district and had waylaid strangers. I immediately had the feeling that I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere. Thank you, said Thorin. That is it. Chapter 2. In the pot. And my throat would go on with it. But I hope you enjoyed it. Very inconsistent accents, as I said, but just for fun. Next time we will read chapter 3 and continue our way through. There are a total of 9 chapters, it looks like. So try and be a little more consistent with timing on this and see if we can continue on in a good clip. Anyway, thank you so much for joining for chapter 2 of The Hobbit. I appreciate you reading along with me here. At any rate, I am going to until chapter 3, exactly. I'm going to cut the stream. I will come back in a little bit and go on to do some gaming streams, I think, a little side, some stuff on the side, but that's it for The Hobbit for today, and we'll try again soon. So until then, everyone, blue skies.